Hello, everyone. Welcome to our PRCA Mental Health Awareness Week panel discussion. Can you afford not to care? ROI, the return on investment of workplace wellbeing. So I'm Nina Bhagwat, and I am, now can I remember my title, Global Group Executive Director of People Engagement at Golin. And I'm really so pleased and so thrilled to have been invited to chair this panel. It's such an important conversation to be having. And today we're going to be exploring how the comms industry can really meaningfully support mental health and well-being in the workplace. And so we're going to be digging into some really important themes here, from the gap between intent and impact, to how empathy, vulnerability, and community can really drive success, aka the business case for well-being. And we're going to be talking about some of those fundamentals like psych safety. Now, I'm so pleased to be joined by a fantastic panel of comms professionals who all have skin in the game and have a deep connection with this subject matter. And they'll all be bringing a huge range of experiences and perspectives. And I'd also really love to invite you to make this as interactive as possible. And there will be an opportunity for us to answer your questions. And so do pop them into the chat. We've got someone who will be monitoring the chat and will be feeding those questions as we go. So please do, as we progress the conversation, send us your questions and your thoughts and your insights. And you can use the Q&A box and the chat for all of those. So we're really yoking the conversation today to the new comprehensive State of Us report. So this is 2 years on from the original report, and it's focusing on the landscape, the comms professionals, as we kind of embark in 2025. And really importantly, it's digging into some of those actions that can really deliver the change. And we hope this space will provide us all with an opportunity to identify some of those key actions, and really kind of provide us with the opportunity to listen in to different approaches, right? So without further ado, I'd love to introduce you to the panel. So we have Nicola Carroll, and she's the head of culture at Speed Communications, with a career spent entirely on the agency side. Nick understands the pressures of fast-paced environments and managing multiple teams. And obviously that is a theme that is going to come up for us. That's very much at the core of the comms sector, right? A trained counsellor, she's deeply invested in mental health and is really passionate about creating support systems that make a difference to professionals working in this field. We have Don Ferguson, and he's a Deputy Managing Director at Hope&Glory, and he's really a leading voice on workplace wellbeing. So as well as being a member of the State of Us steering group, Don openly and with real honesty shares his lived experience, all to promote understanding and change. And he also led the absolutely incredible PR campaign for CALM, Campaign Against Living Miserably. And I was reminded myself of that yesterday as I was doing some, background reading, and I just how powerful that was, right, and impactful. Including that incredible award-winning campaign, The Last Photo and Miss Birthdays. So yeah, we're really lucky to have Don with us sharing his insights. Claire Bridges is the founder of Now Go Create and is a seasoned creative leader with a unique academic background, holding an MSc in Innovation, Creativity and Leadership. And her extensive agency experience spans leading consumer brands, and she's also the author of In Your Creative Element, Exploring Creativity in Business. And Claire, I really enjoyed listening to some of your podcasts. I spent some nice, relaxing afternoons last week listening into the podcast, and I really love like all of those insights you have about creativity and how that can kind of be stymied by our mental health when it gets to a difficult place. So really looking forward to hearing from you. Eileen Boydell is the Managing Director of the PR Network, a virtual consultancy, which obviously is really, really relevant to lots of us who are working in this hybrid kind of way, that builds bespoke teams using a global network of over 1,400 senior practitioners. With a stellar career spanning 20 years, Eileen has led large dispersed teams across markets. And, that's going to be fascinating hearing about the way you can really use empathetic and culturally aware leadership to kind of bring that all together and drive team success. And finally, last but not least, Ellie Thompson is the founder of Delphi, a communications consultancy that supports technology brands with strategic comms to accelerate business success. With over 18 years' experience across the UK and globally, Ellie has worked with both startups and global brands in B2B and B2C sectors, and is also a steering committee member of State of Us. And just to say, I'm so excited to be digging into some of those insights in that report. I really did genuinely enjoy reading that report, and it actually shone a light on some things that were quite new to me, because we're all learning, we're continually learning in this space. So Ellie will be walking us all through those headline insights. But before we dive into the report, I had a very quick question to ask all of the panel. And I'm going to put my cynical hat on now. And I'm going to say, the cynics would say, oh, yeah, Mental Health Awareness Week. They come and go, another date in the DEI calendar. Why is it actually important for us to be marking these dates? And why is this an important conversation for the comms sector to be having today? And I'd like you to answer in just one sentence, because I'm really that mean. So, Nicola, could I start with you?
Try. I don't do anything too much in one sentence, but I think for me, I can see why you're saying that, but ultimately what we all do is raising awareness of stuff in our jobs. Keeping the awareness there is so important. And then I think that the biggest second point to me is, if you are already doing things, it's the opportunity to reflect. So as well as people that, might not be doing things, this comes around every year and it gives you that moment to think about what you're doing. But actually it gives you the opportunity, if you are doing things, to pause and think, well, let's not just keep doing the same. Do we need to reflect? Do we need to pivot? And to keep it fresh and keep it relevant, because obviously PR and the world is moving so fast.
Yeah, and it's definitely moving super fast. 2025, has been a pretty extraordinary year for lots of different reasons. Thank you, Nicola, and you win the prize for summing it up very succinctly. So, Don, can I come to you now? In a sentence, please. Why should we be having this conversation today?
Yeah, I'll try my best. I would say, I think we're an industry full of basically professional people pleasers. And I think that setting boundaries, especially work-life balance boundaries, is a difficult one. And I think that mental health can take a back seat as a respect of that. So I think kind of creating spaces for discussion and kind of empowering people to set those boundaries and have a conversation about it is important. So any opportunity to do that is a good one in my book.
Thanks so much, John. Claire.
Hi, Nina. Hi, great to be here. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. It's lunchtime. So I think, and you say, it comes round and why is it in the calendar? I think clearly whatever we are doing collectively is not working. We're in an epidemic of stress and burnout amongst comms professionals. There is lots of research and study out there at the moment just showing how stressed and burnt out as not just as an industry, but actually as a nation we are. It's rampant, and stress and burnout is absolutely lethal for creative thought. So I think mental health issues and having actions, I know one of the themes of today is about action. We need strategies and actions to cope. It's more important than ever, because whatever we're doing is currently not cutting it for a very large proportion of people.
Thanks, Claire. Look forward to digging into that, the not working bit, the gap. And I know that comes up in the report in quite a strong way. And
yeah,
sometimes it's interesting. It's sometimes more useful to look at what's not working rather than, of course, let's celebrate the wins, but actually digging into that stuff is really super useful. Eileen, could I ask you for your sentence?
Yeah, sure. And thanks for having me here today. I think not giving too much away about my age, I think what's really refreshing is we are talking about it as an industry. And actually, probably earlier in my career, we weren't, but those problems were certainly there. I think the second thing for me as well is having had a couple of, challenges with poor mental health throughout my career. I think it's very isolating as well. So I think the more we can discuss the issues around it and make people feel comfortable that that's okay to have the conversation, I think that can only be a positive thing. So I'm very much looking forward to the discussion today.
Brilliant. And Ellie?
Yeah, it's hard to go last, by the way, when it's going around the panel, because so many brilliant answers already. But I think for me, these sort of weeks, these moments in time are so important, because I think that momentum around these sort of initiatives in our industry really goes up and down, and it can go in these peaks and troughs depending on what's going on commercially for us, what's going on externally. And I think that these moments are important reminders that there's still a huge amount of work to be done. So I think it's a really important reminder. And I think, to Claire's point, it is a collective responsibility. And I think these are points in the year, points in a calendar where the industry actually does come together to discuss action. And it is going to have to be collective action. I think that really does tackle this in an evolving way. And then we sort of all disperse again and go off into our agencies and our workplaces, and we sort of try and instill some of that. But these points where we come together collectively, I think, are really powerful.
Thank you, Ellie. And it kind of goes back, I'm going to use a horrible cliche, so apologies for this, but kind of what gets measured gets done, right? And that's actually, I think, quite a good segue to talking, Ellie, you talking about the report, because that's I think the brilliant value of having that report is that it is actually looking at the state of play, what has worked, what hasn't worked, and like really sort of digging into that measurement piece. So over to you, really looking forward to hearing more about the insights.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you on behalf of State of Us, of everyone on the steering committee, Don included, for sort of being open to sort of chat through the data today. And so as Nina said, State of Us is a mental health network created for comms professionals by comms professionals. We have the aim of uniting the industry on driving positive change. And we first did this research 2 years ago, and we've just repeated it. We've just launched it. And we spoke to 1,000 comms professionals in-house and agency side, and also freelancers and contractors. We recognise that's also a really strong community within our industry to understand the state of mental health in comms today. But this time, which was different to when we did it 2 years ago, we also interviewed a bunch of industry leaders who were incredibly generous with their time, and also partnered with Mental Health First Aid England, because as I think somebody has said, I think it was you, Claire, there is so much in the industry out there that focuses on problem identification, and we really wanted this to focus on solutions as well. So in the report, and if you are so inclined, please do go and download it. There are sort of tangible actions co-created with Mental Health First Aid England that employees can take to really kind of move beyond policies and nurture positive mental health. So do check that out. But yeah, to frame the conversation today, I'm just going to go through a few highlights from the quant findings. So really what comms practitioners told us in terms of the state of mental health right now. Gabriella, if you're happy to move forward, and probably a couple more as well. So the findings show that mental health challenge in the industry continues to worsen, despite progress that absolutely I will go into has been between this study and the last one. So 64% of us have experienced extreme stress or burnout at work in the last 12 months, which is an increase from 51% from the first study. And 60% of professionals said that mental health is definitely a bigger problem in the industry now than it was 2 years ago. On the next slide, we look at for those who have experienced severe stress, anxiety, or burnout, to tell us the primary cause. And the number one reason we're experiencing this is too many demands on our time in the workplace. And in fact, we also found through another question that 60% said the intensity of their role has increased, which was a 13% increase on 2 years ago. Interestingly, I will call out, you see commute time going up that list. I don't think that's any surprise in terms of last time we did this, we were very much just coming out of COVID. So we were all probably remote. And I think as companies have grappled with hybrid, the commute time and the impact of maybe return to work is also being felt. So I just thought that was worth calling out. However, on the next slide, the findings do reveal that progress has been made in the industry, and it is important to recognise that in some key areas there has been this progress. So the results show that organisations are more aware, they're more understanding of mental health, there's more frequent training in place, there are now policies in place more, and they're generally better equipped to support their teams. The majority, 71% of people, agree that their company's approach to mental health has improved in the last 2 years, with more than 2/3 now rating it as being either very good or quite good. Just under half said that their company has formal policies in place around mental health and that these are sufficient. So that was about 48%. That's worth calling out that was only 20%. So only 20% of companies 2 years ago had formal policies in place. That has shot up to just shy of 50%. Still a long way to go, but it is a big improvement. And although more people have taken time off work due to mental health difficulties, they do report greater comfort in explaining and talking about this to their employers. On the topic of speaking up, you'll see here there's more evidence dotted around the study that suggests that speaking up is becoming easier. So there are less employees keeping it to themselves and more are discussing experience across a more diverse range of people as well. So line managers, colleagues, HR and direct reports. But speaking up also comes at a cost. On the next slide, we see that 46% said that disclosing mental health challenges has a negative impact on their work life. And 79% of people who told someone in their workplace about their mental health challenge experienced some form of discrimination, which I think raises questions as to whether they will obviously continue to speak up and seek support. Overall, the research highlighted that there is, and if we move on to the next slide, that there's a really clear requirement to move beyond policies now, which has improved, and provide proactive, consistent support to everybody. So respondents reported that companies are definitely more reactive than proactive when it comes to handling mental health issues. Over half still agree that their company does only the bare minimum when it comes to dealing with challenges. And over half of respondents expressed that mental health is talked about a lot, but much more could be done to effectively support employees. This is really sad. 59% think mental health challenges are now considered normal in our industry. The support received, as we see on the next slide, is also misaligned to preferences. So changes put in place and then preferred changes. And I think this would be an interesting one for employers to sort of look at. There is a slight misalignment in points in terms of really the change that people are looking for. And I think even more concerning, as we see on the next slide, is the fact that equity in providing support is just not there. So 53% said their company is not equally supportive across diverse backgrounds, which I think shows a very clear need and shows us, I think, that inclusive, culturally competent support is a huge gap in most strategies. And finally, I guess in line with the provocation that you gave us at the beginning, Nina, in terms of ROI and the cost, can you afford to not care? There is a real risk associated with not addressing this, far beyond obviously just the fact that it is beholden on employers to a certain degree. The study told us that support directly affects employees' loyalty and their decision to stay with their current agency, or workplace. 49%, which was a plurality, said that mental health support received makes them more likely to stay, which has increased from 35-36% 2 years ago. So those were the key findings. Hopefully it sort of sparks a bit of conversation today. And as I say, do check out the report where we dig into solutions as well as as well as the state of it.
Thanks so much, Ellie. Really super interesting, and it's great to hear you talking through that. Like I said, I've read the report a couple of times, but actually the more you hear, the more you get for it. So I really would encourage people to dive into that report, to both understand the issues and the blockers and the barriers, but also some of those enablers and some of those ideas around actions that can deliver the change. So I'm going to open this up to the panel, but I think for me, one of the most interesting things in the report was the section which was around the say-do gap, which kind of sort of got into that whole piece around, there's stuff that we as employers might say, but there's sort of a bit of a gap between what is actually delivered and, whether that's around some of the initiatives feeling a bit performative and a bit rolled out for Mental Health Awareness Week or on those special calendar events and not baked into the culture. Whether it's around some of those financial or practical challenges, right? Because we're in an industry that works in a very specific way with a lot of challenges around time, and also finally going into that piece around equity, how the importance of yoking mental well-being to EDI and considering and being considerate of the intersect between the two. So thinking about that gap, I'm just wondering whether any of our panel have any insights on that. I mean, Nicola, I know we were talking about the importance of actually understanding whether a well-being policy is actually helping people.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so important, isn't it? Because it doesn't really matter if a company's got something in place. If the staff working there don't feel like it's working, you may as well not have it in place, really. It might be helping you as a business when you're presenting yourself to prospective clients and things like that. But in terms of the people you actually want it to help, that's really where you need the feedback, I suppose, would be my first point. And as I said, sort of that opportunity for companies to reflect on what they're doing and if it's working. At that point, it's hearing from the people that it's supposed to be supporting and helping, isn't it? And I think as a business, whether you're a really tiny agency or in-house team or really big, it's about understanding that one size isn't going to fit all anyway. So you kind of got to be prepared to be agile, I think, in this situation, and get feedback from your team and understand that you're not also going to get one piece of uniform feedback that then is going to go, right, well, that's it, that's what we'll pivot and do now. It's a selection of things, isn't it? And I think the other thing for me in terms of the gap between saying and doing is perhaps, teams understanding that it does require investment. We don't want to make it sound really hard for people, but ultimately it's not just having a policy and expecting it to kind of do the job. It does need investment in terms of time and potentially money of people having those conversations, making themselves available to people. And I guess it's an acceptance of that top down and making sure people sort of know that and are living it.
Am I okay to add?
Yeah,
absolutely. I really agree with that. I think it is, and I also think it's about commitment from leadership. I think that the single biggest factor is from your workforce in feeling that you are in a safe environment, and that support is available, is that when you ask for it or if you flag something's done. So I think the onus is on leadership and on companies to act within the framework they have set out when issues are flagged. And I think that gets you quite quickly to the fundamental tension, I guess, in our industry, that is the commercial tension, the fact that the client-agency relationship is very often what can be a real challenge, and can, as that data showed, the intensity of our roles from both the in-house perspective and the agency side. But that client-agency relationship really can be a source of a huge amount of some of the challenges. And that means that there needs to be some really safe bubbles and I think action when things are flagged. And I think if leaders don't act, then trust is very, very quickly broken. And then any policy that you have in place really doesn't mean anything, which was your point, Nicola.
And I think, Ellie, the point in the results that you just went through that kind of jumped out at me again was around the people that have flagged issues that then felt like they were discriminated against following that. So again, like, that's just obviously awful to hear, isn't it? It's a really worrying statistic. And it's, you know, again, if I've asked for help, even if you've done something, if I felt like it's then impacted me later down the line, well, what good was the help in the first place?
Claire, I can see you nodding there, and I was reminded of your answer to that first question I asked. You from what you're saying, you think that this gap is kind of widening at the moment.
Well, it's super interesting because Eileen was saying, you know, perhaps when she several years ago, perhaps, you know, workplace mental health was not perhaps discussed or supported in the workplace as it is now. But I think listening to those stats, which are actually, I think, really shocking, that it is a miracle that anyone is saying what they want. This say-do gap. You know, the say-do gap is like, it sounds like an employee might say something, and then actually what the employer does is actually counter to what the help you might have wanted or needed. So I think although we're making headway, as some of the stats suggest, there just seem to be so many taboos. I think that it's also shocking that stat about 60% of mental health issues are considered the norm is really shocking. I think what we need to do is normalize conversations about mental health, but not make it the norm. That just seems to be going backwards to me. And the fact that, as you said, Nicola, as you referenced, that 79% of people saying they've experienced discrimination when they share that they are struggling, is that really just shows that there's a very long way to go. As you say, it's almost like, why would you, if you're prepared, you know, that means that almost everybody, 8 out of 10 people who share that they're struggling in some way are going to be discriminated against. When I was in agency, and this is, you know, 14, 15 years ago, and I really do hope that a lot of things have changed, and I get the sense that they have. But I suffered both burnout and depression, so work-related burnout, and then, you know, personal issues of depression that I brought to the office. But there was absolutely zero support. And I know for a fact that my career suffered as a result of admitting both of those scenarios at different times to the leadership that I was working with. So I think that, as I say, we need to normalize talking about it, not make it normal, because and how we do that. I think one of the things I wanted to say about this as well, about this sort of say-do gap, is that I think mental health issues and burnout, which I because I've experienced it a couple of times, and, you know, creativity is my bag, because it's so lethal to creativity, is a real area I'm interested in, is that I think we need to reframe. We're talking about productivity here, and I know it's like the cost of this is all about the ROI, is like that we need time to think, we need time to regroup, we need time to recharge. These things are not on timesheets. So how do we allow people the time they need to think, to strategize, to be creative? And I think it's really hard to know what to ask for from your employer if you're not even sure yourself. So I think if we're in comms, then it's got to be about finding structures like we talked about, that psychological safety, making it okay. And I don't have the answer to that, because it sounds like it's not okay. You know, it's not okay necessarily to admit these things at work, because it's not moving anything forward. So I do think that creativity is a leadership issue, and I think this is a leadership issue. It requires leaders to be able to share what's normal as well, because the leaders aren't immune from this. Leadership and agencies and in-house teams, they're not immune from this. So I think there's something there about, in terms of the action, is how we make those conversations more visible from a senior point of view, so that perhaps other people don't feel like, if I say something, you know, my career is going to suffer.
Thanks, Claire, and thanks for your honesty as well, and talking about, you know, I should just say that, you know, it's a big deal. I know lots of people talk about their mental health, but I still think it's still, you know, I'm really grateful that you're happy to open up, and, you know, obviously the panel, it's kind of about destigmatizing and making it a quote unquote normal conversation to have. And I'm wondering if, Don, if you want to jump in here, because I know in the work it's about destigmatizing the conversation, but I'm just wondering if you want to talk about also as part of the steering group, how did you feel sort of seeing the results from this report 2 years on? Was it sort of glass half empty, glass half full? How were you feeling about it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I think the points made around kind of sweeping kind of ideas that will solve problems without actually doing anything is definitely there, and you can see it, and you see maybe agencies are putting things forward for award entries or to kind of be seen in a certain way. I think one of the things that frightens me most of all is the fact that there is the piece of people speaking up around their mental health and feeling stigmatized around it. I do think also, and having suffered burnout and depression myself, you don't know you're in a bad place sometimes, and you need people to come and tell you that and kind of get you out of it. So I think if the stats show the people that have spoken up, but there are probably many more who haven't and haven't had that opportunity. And I think that's terrifying because there's a number of people who are kind of going under the radar. And I think the point around psychological safety is important. I think there is a need for modeling that vulnerability and being intentional about it and actively looking to your teams and seeing if someone is close to crisis, in crisis, and actively supporting them. So when I was going through my stuff, my team got me out of it. And I think if they hadn't, I think it would have got worse. So I think actually having that space and that structure is vital, because people can get in some really difficult places.
Thanks, Don. And actually, as you were all talking, it reminded me of a conversation I had with I don't know if you know Poppy Germain, who I think she started off mental health first aiders during the financial crash. And she gave me an idea actually, which I've never used, which was around a mental health signature. And it's kind of about destigmatizing the whole subject. So you basically have a conversation with your teams and you all exchange your mental health signature. So I would sort of say, okay, my mental health signature is like, if I'm wearing an orange jumper 3 days or 4 days on the trot and I've got back-to-back calls and you can see from my diary that there are no gaps, it's probably an indication that Nina isn't feeling great. And in having that conversation in a neutral space where you're exchanging your mental health signature, and they're all unique, right? All of our signatures are unique, that it actually opens up a conversation for your team members to say, oh, Nina, you're wearing that jumper again. How are you feeling? Do you know what I mean? And it's sort of, with a lot of this stuff, it's sort of, we know what we should be doing, but it's kind of having those nudges really that feels like the thing that's really important. Don, do you have any idea what it was? You say your team stepped in. Do you know what it was about the culture, about your dynamic that enabled that to happen?
I think, I mean, we have Hope&Glory has a very open culture, and kind of that role modeling of vulnerability comes from the top down, and that's always been the case. So I think that sense of bringing yourself to the agency has always been kind of in the DNA, and that is helpful in so many ways, not just this area. I think also we brought things in like listening groups, and also we have this thing called the Book of Me. So when new joiners come to the agency, they give a sense of who they are, how they like to work, where their triggers are, things like that make them anxious, those sorts of things, in as much as they'd like to share or not, that is there and that's accessible to everybody. And I think by doing that, and that actually starting with the senior leadership team, was something that role modeled a behavior that the reality is that it's a psychologically safe space and people can be themselves. So I think it's just those individuals could just see a change in my demeanor and they noticed it. And I think that the fact that we have strong personal relationships rather than just professional ones is the thing that kind of saved me, to be honest with you. So yeah, it was important. And I think it hopefully I pay that forward to other people and notice when that's happening with others. And I think actually being curious about how someone is rather than what they just do is just as important. I think that's part of the job.
Thanks so much, Don. Now, I know we are sort of moving into more of the kind of enablers and that some of the solutions. What I don't want to do is disregard a lot of the the reality of the situation for people in terms of the challenges with resourcing, time, bandwidth, the pressure coming from clients. So I'm wondering if we can sort of yoke those two things together and maybe look at, given that it's quite a challenging environment that we're all working through at the moment, given that there are challenges on our time, budgets are tight, teams are stretched. What are some of the things that can really kick in to make a difference? I mean, Eileen, I think in our chat earlier this week, we talked about empathy. That was a word that I know you used a great deal.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's the thing, it's leading with empathy. And I actually, a few points that I think Don's touched on, and Ellie and Claire, I think it really is kind of leading from the top. And actually, in an environment on the agency side where budgets might be tight and you're seeing, increased pressure from clients, does have an impact on teams. I would say that leading from the top about having a conversation about scope creep should be part of any engagement with clients as well, in the sense of understanding where that pressure is coming from, for your team members as well. I know, obviously, it's quite shocking, I think, some of the results that Ellie spoke through as well. We've just done a bit of qualitative research with purely in-house stakeholders that we're going to launch later this year, but it's also not easy for them, I don't think, in the sense of where they are at the moment. So constant justification of the role of PR within the business, having to have a lot of emotional intelligence around dealing with quite senior stakeholders when things aren't going wrong or crisis hits or reputation is wrong as well. So I do think there's an element about going a bit further outside of your team as well, and really kind of working with clients to understand that as well. It's not just confined, I think, for a mental health conversation within your immediate team. It's everybody that you're kind of working with. I think, a lot of the time as well, Don, I think you kind of touched on it there. I think we're very good at, I would say, always having an open door policy where somebody will come to you as well. I think what I would say that's really important is actually to seek out response from those team members as well, so that you're encouraging a conversation to happen, but it's just the indicators that you think, they'll come to me when something's wrong, but actually it can actually be the other way around. And I think it's trying to spot those things before it becomes worse. And also, I think it's, again, trust in the leadership. Ellie, you touched on this earlier, but having that trust to kind of put your money where your mouth is. And actually, we've got a couple of real situations where we've had a relationship, we've tried our absolute hardest with a particular client. I know that came up in the survey results as well, but it was going toxic. So for me, it was a very personal encounter. It was to do with me when I was in an account management role a few years back. But it was the point where you kind of go into yourself, and it's quite hard to pull yourself out if you haven't got the right support and team around you. So I was fortunate, our co-founders, Nikki and George, were kind of there supporting me. It's a great client, in terms of brand name, but ultimately there was nobody to escalate the issues that they were creating that was having an impact on my mental health. So the decision was that client has to go. And actually, I think that's where your teams do trust in you to do the right thing from the top when things aren't great. I think if you're in that unusual client situation. And actually after that, I think we ended up, there was one that we could see going down that road, and for all the good in intent, we actually said, it was a 6-figure client. We said, actually, no, for the expense of our team, no, thank you. We'd rather resign the account just for, safeguarding our team, really. So I think sometimes it is about having, your team need to trust that you will do the right thing at the right point as well, to kind of continue that trust, and that you're there to kind of support them and you have their back. So I think, in a world, it's not easy to say bye to, that kind of revenue, but ultimately it was a great kind of outcome for us because we were working with better clients as a result, because our team had the space, psychologically safe space to do so. And, we could go out and select the clients we wanted, and then some after that as well. So it's absolutely no regrets, 100% the right thing to do.
I can see lots of nodding around the room. Nicola, were you in agreement with that in terms of, that how important it is to for leaders to manage those client demands?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it all comes from setting it up right from the start. I think, we've all probably got sort of service level agreements and things that we say that we will and won't accept, and you put those boundaries in place at the beginning, but it's sticking to them and making sure that the little examples don't slip, because I would imagine in Eileen's example there was probably quite a build up to that point where you had to make that decision. And so I think it's not only leaders sort of sticking by their word, and when there are examples of perhaps unacceptable behaviour or unacceptable demands, kind of sticking to it, but also it then comes back to the wider point that I think Don has made about the relationships and the rapport within your teams, people feeling like they can flag that and escalate that, because let's be realistic, leaders are not involved in the day-to-day a lot of the time, so your team needs to feel like they can come to you as a leader on something that feels like a really small point, but if it's made you feel a certain way, being open to that conversation. So I think it's fusing kind of setting the boundaries correct at the start, and then the trust within your team and the rapport that people feel like someone will come and support them and will help them, whether that's speaking to the client direct or just perhaps a bit of coaching of how you to deal with it yourself, whatever's right in that individual circumstance.
And it strikes me that what we're talking about, it keeps coming back to psychological safety, right? So for people to talk about their mental health and feel confident enough that actually, if I say this, there isn't going to be any negative comeback on me, or if it's having a conversation with your leader about something that a client has said, all of this requires that psychological safety from the get-go. I mean, it's like psychological safety is the absolute bedrock of inclusion.
Yeah.
And we throw that word around, don't we? Psychological safety. And I'm just curious, could anyone explain to me what that actually looks like or feels like in their place of work when you walk in, when you have a meeting? What are the things that kind of create that and give your employees and teams a sense that exists?
I'll just make one small point and then I'll hand over because I've been talking lots. But I think one thing on that is whether it's leadership or somebody really junior into the business, it's understanding that your resilience or your the way you take a situation can be really different to someone else. So you only feel that sense of psychological safety if you feel like you expressing that you found something difficult or something's had an impact on your mental health, and it's okay to share that even if you feel like somebody else that wouldn't have impacted them. So I think for us, like at Speed, we have loads of different forums, probably much like everywhere else, where you can share those things, whether it's one-to-one line management conversations, we have open door monthly sessions with the MD, we have forums and peer groups, but it's feeling like you can share something and no one's going to come back to you and say, oh, but that wouldn't have had that impact on me. You've got to be able to, everyone's got to be educated enough, I suppose, to just think everyone is different and it's going to impact people differently and feel safe to share that.
I was just thinking, I also think it kind of comes down to clarity and really clear expectations of and really clear laying out of the boundaries and frameworks that you are expected to kind of operate within the workplace. As humans, I think we like clarity. We like to understand what is acceptable, what isn't acceptable, what's good, what's bad. And I think that is the sort of creation of a psychologically safe environment, I think, starts with setting those expectations and behaviours really clearly and being very clear about it so people understand the framework that they're operating within. Then I think, as Nicola says, it comes down to listening with, really with no judgment on anyone or anything, and then action when it's needed. And sometimes action is not needed. Sometimes it is enough to listen. But if action is required, the action's then taken sensitively, quickly, and decisively, and lessons are learnt. So then I'd go learning on after action. But I think that those would be, I think, some of the pillars of creating that sort of environment.
And Claire, I think you were going to speak then, weren't you?
I was just going to say something about ultimately, I think psychological safety, and I did quite a lot of research around this when I was writing my book, because to put it in layman's terms, it is trust, right? It's trust. Do I trust you to do what you say you're going to do? Do I trust you not to hurt me? Do I trust you not to emotionally, obviously physically, we would hope that isn't happening the way, but do I emotionally trust that what I say will be taken in the spirit it's meant? And that trust is so fundamental, because if you look at a lot of the research, and by the way, Google has amazing resources around psychological safety. So Google Rework have a whole piece around psychological safety, because they did a lot of that initial research. Because what they said was, what's the thing that makes the difference? Google obviously have tens of thousands of people working for them. What's the difference between a very high performing team? Because everyone's high performing at Google, right? Like, what's the difference between a high performing team here and one that's not? And it wasn't about their academic prowess. It wasn't about their engineering degrees. It wasn't about other things. The one thing that came out was trust, or what they call psychological safety. So there's lots of really great resources there. But really importantly, trust is then fundamental for a lot of the other things that we're expected to be able to do. So if you want creativity and innovation, you ask people to take risks. You ask people to fail. You ask people to try something, to experiment, and it might not work. And if we don't trust each other that is okay, even in a very small way, how are you ever going to you're never going to find your voice. So I sort of often think about psychological safety, and it is about my voice. Is my voice heard? Is it listened to? Am I even allowed to articulate what I want to say? And then that can sort of go across all sorts of different areas in terms of, is it okay to speak up when something goes wrong? Is it okay for me to speak in a creative workshop? I've been in horrific situations where somebody senior is, shh somebody when they were having an idea, like these things happen, and then that just shuts everybody down. So it's that sense of we have a sort of collective sense that it's okay around here. Everything's okay around here. And I can say what I'm feeling, what I think, even if what I think is different to you. And so but it's so layered. But I think fundamentally that sense of trust, like we're saying, is and also the other thing I just wanted to say is, I know is about clients. Because when we were talking, I was thinking, I know obviously you're coming from an agency point of view. One of the reasons I actually left agency was because the toxicity of the client agency relationship. It was impossible. So you can talk about psychological safety in an agency sense, and we can all try and put our arms around each other. But the clients need to be brought into that as well, or the people you're serving, whether it's stakeholders internally. Because if they don't buy into that, then actually you create this trust, and then somebody outside comes in and just wrecks it. So it's very much a collaborative piece, which frankly, when I was working in a big agency, I couldn't find that balance for myself or for my team, because talking about productivity, that the requirement was always more. And you talked about scope creep, Nicola, and boundaries and all of those things. But when you've got 100, 200, 300 grand's worth of client money coming in, my MD would say to me, fine, if you don't like it, go and get another one. Go and find me another 300-400 grand client, in November that year when, you had the money to make up. So I think that sense of trying somehow to bring all our stakeholders together to understand what we're talking about in relation to psychological safety is really important, because the productivity demands are coming often from the client who's paying the bills. And so there's an imbalance there to start with.
Thanks, Claire. And actually, I'm going to bring in a question that has come in, which kind of speaks to that productivity bandwidth piece, and just see what thoughts you all have about this. So the point made is that in the report, severe stress from workload and burnout both increased by the same sharp amount. It's clear action is needed. But the workload issue has been a recurring one for many years. The case-by-case conversations are great, helpful and happening, but is this a systemic issue in how we operate? And what can companies do to break down those structures in a sustainable way? So I think it's kind of what you were saying, Claire. Yes, lovely, psych safety is there for your agency, for your teams internally. But as a service industry, what happens when you're exposed to lots of different cultures, client cultures, right? And the business model is predicated on you serving those clients in a certain way. So I'm just going to throw that knotty question out to the panel as a whole.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think a systemic issue, probably. It's certainly the elephant in the room. I think it is it's really layered now. I think we've gone through a period of a few years, and right now we find ourselves in incredibly complex, layered. It's never been more competitive, in-house and agency side. People are leaving the industry. People are being made redundant. So there is much more focus on commerciality within businesses, and leaders are having to make really, really tough decisions really often about commercial decisions. And unfortunately, what happens is it's seen as commercial decisions versus wellbeing and investment in wellbeing. And that, we're all here, I would assume, because we all believe that that's not the case. It doesn't have to be versus. I think it is that the industry and that structure and the client agency relationship structure probably does need a refresh. I think the way that the bringing in and the prevalence of tools like AI are going to create this, is going to bring this to a head pretty quickly as well. But I think how we might see changes to how we bill our time, how we bill our teams, how we look at profitability, the margins that we're looking at as agency leaders and as business leaders. Those are all things that sort of have to come into consideration when you are looking at how we make our money, how we grow, how we reward people, and how we sort of genuinely tackle this sort of tension of being a service industry, but having people to sort of, to look after and be responsible for as well. And as the question quite rightly says, it is only getting busier. And that is a resourcing thing. And it is the need, where I would say it probably starts, is ruthlessly tracking time and allowing space in time. Don't bill people to 90% anymore. Let's really look at how much we're billing people to, and let's start to build that into our budgeting. And I mean, it's a huge question, and definitely not one with 7 minutes left of a panel to kind of go into. But it's incredibly layered. But yes, I do think it is a really long-standing issue, and it could, solving it could sort of upend a little bit the way that we look at the way we run agencies, I think.
Nicola.
I was just going to add, as you say, I know we want to probably move on to other areas, but sort of for a bit of balance, I suppose, in my personal experience, I'd say in the last year to 18 months, when we've been pitching for new work and I'm agency side, it is a really healthy conversation in the room now. Mm-hmm. I do feel like clients, they're not all the big bad wolves anymore. And I know that I don't want to rub anyone up the wrong way that is, in a space where they're experiencing clients really being demanding for them. Obviously that still exists, but I think there is some positive, and clients are more aware probably of the way that they might have treated people previously and things. So I guess it's just, again, there's a responsibility on the agency in terms of the structures and how they phase their billing and all of those things. But I think it's healthy that is being talked about, and I do think that in-house teams are more aware of it and more aware of the way that they treat their agencies.
And vice versa, they're under incredible pressure themselves. And I think agency teams also need to have empathy for the pressures that they face internally from their internal stakeholders. And I think it is absolutely collectively that as a united team, agency, and that's the ideal, right? Agency and in-house, to come together and work out how they want to work collectively.
Yeah, because again, it comes back to the trust and the rapport and the empathy, because that's not to say that if you're really, really kind, then you can ask for the moon on a stick. But, if you have got that rapport and there is that one occasion where things need to happen quickly, if you've got that relationship and that understanding, and there's a bit of a like, oh, if we can get this done now, we might be able to push back on something else later. Do you know what I mean? I feel like that that building of the relationship is a lot to do with it, because when we're talking about well-being and kind of the drive to burnout, that's quite different to somebody who is experiencing mental health issues because of their experiencing them anyway, and there's external factors. The way you're treated in the workplace and how that impacts your well-being is different to a certain extent, and that is a lot to do with the way you're treated, the understanding and the trust.
Yeah, I think if you and I guess looking at it away from the client agency relationship and purely as commercial, as the competitive landscape of agencies right now, quite aside from whether the clients you have are in that journey with you or are challenging, the commercial environment is pushing up workloads for sort of specifically kind of more junior members of the team and sort of middle management, and that is something that I think needs kind of looking at in terms of how we support and how we resource in that sense.
Eileen, I know you talked about quite a positive play in terms of a relationship with a client, and actually the agency saying actually we're not we don't want to accept that kind of behaviour from the client. Have you any thoughts as to how you can positively reset?
Yeah, I think so, and I think I definitely agree it's a systemic issue. I think also it is actually about being really on the kind of client management and actually being able to have a conversation about it. It comes from the trust and rapport, but also I think we are naturally, as an industry, perhaps people pleasers, and we always want to say yes to everything. And frankly, we're also businesses and we can't. So I think there has to be an element of coming back to the commerciality of it, having a conversation, and it's actually on the agenda to say that. And whether it's about servicing or otherwise, or team members, or how that's resourced, it needs to be a point of discussion. It can't just be swept under the carpet. So I think sometimes maybe, well, it's systemic, and we could easily say, well, the client's demanding more. I think it is also on us to raise it as agency side as well, that it's a challenge. So yeah, that would be my view.
I just wanted to say something, Nina. I know we're coming close to time, but I just wanted to say something there, just sort of more widely. I think it's really interesting when we're talking about tying PR outcomes and objectives and commercial objectives, and going back to what you said right at the beginning about what you measure. It's important what you measure. I see so much work that is what I'd call busy work, and that's not actually tied to any potential outcome, that's tied to a KPI for the client. And I think, I'm lucky enough to be involved at Cannes and have judged at lots of awards, and trying to draw that real red thread between what PR and comms is doing and the business objective is, if that can be proven, then that sort of busy work, or if that's more hardwired, that busy work is sometimes pushed to the side, that sort of workload of doing stuff for the sake of doing stuff. If it's tied to a KPI, tied to a business objective, if it's not delivering against that, it might be worth questioning whether it's worth doing, rather than it just being something the more, being asked to do more and more. I mean, just using eyeballs and getting coverage on things which you'd think we were past, but I look at a lot of award entries and we're really not. But is it delivering a sale, or is it delivering a change in reputation, or whatever? So I think it is, as Ellie says, it's so multi-led, but I think measuring what needs to be measured could help with scope creep.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think quality of work versus quantity of work is an interesting thing to talk about. And I think productivity is often just looked at volume, speed, billable hours, and busyness, which I think has been exacerbated by COVID, to be honest with you. And that hangover is still with us. But I think, for instance, setting out what your purpose is as a business, or your approach to new business, or your approach to ideas. And for instance, we take an approach of the 3 F's. It's either fun, fame, and fortune, and we hope to get 2 of those. And it doesn't always have to be fortune. And that kind of sense of, will this be fun for the team? Will they get something out of it? Will it give us fame and opportunity? And fortune is third, but they are all equally important. I think having 2 that are not fortune and are not kind of that billable hours piece is vital, because at the end of the day, you want teams to stay with you for a long period of time, and it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And the more you can retain teams, the more you can retain talent, the more you can retain culture. And the thing you should be investing in is your culture. That's the ultimate.
And then you get a return on that investment, right? Which takes us back to the title of this panel discussion. We are at time. I can't believe it. That hour has just flown by. Thank you all so much, panel. Before I liberate you, I just have one quick question to fire off at all of you, and then we'll wrap up. But I just wanted to thank everyone who tuned in to listen to this on a Friday lunchtime. Just to say, I really encourage you to dig into that State of Us report and spend some time with it. There's some really valuable insights there. There's also the PRCA mental health toolkit. And like me, you can dig into Claire's podcasts. I really enjoyed listening to a couple of those episodes, Claire, and I will be there listening, a regular subscriber. So lots of stuff to inspire, and definitely worth looking at the things that, the barriers, the things that aren't working, and then also looking at those enablers. It comes back to this measurement and honesty piece. That's where I think the value of the report really, really, really lies. So as we head into the weekend, just want to ask the panel really quickly, what's the one thing that you've heard today that's given you pause for thought and that you'll actually take with you into work on Monday? So I wonder if I can start with, well, actually, if someone's got an idea immediately, I'll open it up to you to jump in.
I was going to say reflection is a very unusual thing to say, and it's quite abstract, but I think we are so busy running fast all the time to actually reflect on this. And we kind of monitor ourselves as the kind of health of our agency. It's like kind of in our KPIs, and, we want everybody to be happy, but it's just reflecting on it sometimes to say, am I doing the right thing? Have I got time to do this? And also, I think, Don, your idea about the book of me is genius. Love that. Absolutely brilliant.
Don.
I think the fundamental piece is it's about boundaries. And I think we sell time, and having boundaries around our time is important. I think the other thing that would stick with me is some clients are really nice, and I have some very nice ones. And the key thing is working on the relationship, and the relationship is everything. And that's where all good work comes from. That's where good culture comes from. That's where good mental health comes from. So just spending your time in that is the thing I would encourage people to do.
Nicola.
I think mine is sort of quite a personal one rather than a sort of like, thinking about something for the industry. And that is to remember to bring myself to things, because I think I always tell everyone else to do that. But my tendency is probably to try to be the be strong person. But actually, I should practice what I preach a little bit more.
Fantastic. Ellie.
I was sort of really, really similar to Don's actually. It's relationships and trust. We are a people industry, whichever people we're talking about, clients, colleagues, bosses, people we're managing or being a line manager for. And also the difference, I think, because we're a really small agency, that idea of busy work and work that takes time, and it's okay if it takes time. If you only do one thing in a day, but it's a great idea, or it's a really important deck, but that's just the one thing you did rather than having to do 20 things. And I think that for me, that's my personal takeout, my broader takeout is that remember, we're all humans.
We're definitely all humans, 100% for sure. Claire.
Yeah, so many interesting things to reflect on, and I think it's bringing me to mind this conversation about I think it's Daniel Pink said that breaks are not a deviation in performance, but they are part of performance. And I think going back to that piece about, we can all be doing busy work, but what is the great work? What is the thing at the end of 2025? We're only in mid-May. At the end of 2025, what are we going to look back on and say, what was the great work that I did? What is the thing that I'm proud that I spent my mental and physical energy on behalf of a client or on behalf of the agency? And try to minimize where possible that busy work. I think that's the thing, is having a purpose, an objective for your year, because that comes through to your week, your day, the hour that you're in. So for me, I think all of the things that have been talked about, just so many interesting points, and I think the survey, the study is really interesting, Ellie. So thanks for doing that.
Yes, huge thanks to all of you. Some brilliant, I've made a note for myself. Reflection, boundaries, relationships and trust, great work. Have a think about busy work and where you're putting your time. And I'm really hoping that everyone has a fantastic rest of year. It's a difficult year. It's a strange time, but I'm really hoping that everyone manages to find the time to really prioritize well-being, because I think, as we've discussed, it's just so super important for us all as human beings, but also to our businesses. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Nina.
Have a wonderful weekend.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.
Thank you, Nina.
Bye.